Thank you so much. I'm Rebecca. I'm a woman with dark curly hair, and right now I'm sitting in a hotel room in Scotland. The voice you're hearing is my ASL interpreter. Mara and I are honored to be invited back to this book fair to chat about the wonderful collection we co-edited called Crip Authorship, Disability as Method, which is truncated to CA. Thank you very much to everyone who's been working to make this book fair and panel happen, and thank all of you for coming today. Crip Authorship was published in August 2023 by NYU Press in both print and open access versions. Crip Authorship originated in the early months of COVID. At that time, it was increasingly obvious how important it is to attend to disability expertise regarding chronic illness, quarantine, and remote work, and more broadly, to disability ways of communicating, interacting, producing, and sharing knowledge. Mara and I decided this was an urgent moment to ask our colleagues and friends to write essays about their methods related to writing, research, publication, and making. The result is a 400-plus page volume with 35 chapters by leading activists, artists, and academics and writers. The book starts from the premise that disability is a creative force, a spur, and a method of production. The mismatch between disabled body minds and built and social environments, leading to particular Crip ways of thinking, being, representing, and making. Tobin Siebers, who was a disabled academic, explains the connection between disability and method in 2008, saying, the disabled body changes the process of representation itself. Blind hands envision faces of old acquaintances. Deaf eyes listen to public television. Mouths sign autographs. Different bodies require and create new modes of representation. End quote. Two other scholars, Amy Hamright and Kelly Fritsch, wrote the article Crip Technoscience Manifesto. That article explains Crip refers to the non-compliant, anti-assimilationist position that disability is a desirable part of the world, end quote. They urge an approach to making and unmaking. In the realm of technical creation, they emphasize practices of critique, alteration, and reinvention of our material discursive world. When Mara and I started writing this book, we were thinking of Crip authorship in this way. As something aesthetic, felt and performed, as well as something media and technical. So disability influence, shape, authorship, how does that happen? This question takes individuals and collectives into account, body minds, and communities of discourse. Crip authorship can transgress the rules of authorship, can refer to Crip forms and composition practices. It can be unpublishable, or it can alter conventions. DA experiences, feelings of creation, authorship, equal important outcomes and products. So CA is divided into sections on writing, research, genre, publishing, and media. And that reflects the ways disability is embedded, the through line of authorship, practices of writing among other forms of composition, feelings about writing, environments, economies of composition, sometimes invisible labor that can happen before, during, after writing, collaboration, Crip aesthetics, formats and hacks, encounters with bureaucracy of publishing, the media through which we communicate, the technology, the capital, access, legal status, and care networks required to publish. The book and today's panelists explore these issues. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mara.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Let me just echo Rebecca's thanks to Alina and Payam and everyone participating in the performative book fair this year. I'm so impressed by what you've done. This is such an urgent event. This is as Rebecca mentioned, it's our second time visiting with you, this time with a different group of authors from our big collection. It's an international collection. We have a Canadian contingent with us today, accidentally, on the theme of translation, which is the theme of the book fair. This is such an urgent time for this book fair, and I wish we could all be there for the whole event with you in person. Our book shares the concerns of the book fair with the power imbalances and exclusionary codes in the publishing business. So we're especially delighted to be part of it. I'm Mara. I'm a middle-aged white woman. I have curly brown hair in a messy bun. I'm sitting in front of a gray wall, also in a hotel room. I'm in Berlin. Um, Sorry I couldn't make it up to Hamburg, but I'm in Berlin for a conference this weekend at Humboldt University. So I'll just briefly build on Rebecca's overview of this edited collection, Crip Authorship, by saying a few words about disability and authorship. And authorship, as most of you know, has a dictionary meaning, lots of everyday meanings, but it also has a legal meaning. In the most obvious sense of the word, an author is a writer, especially a writer of books. But in the dictionary, in the second sense of authorship, an author is a creator far beyond the literary sphere. An author can be a creator of architecture, software, music, choreography, artwork, many other things. Authorship has historically been associated with creative genius, autonomy, and originality. And to be an author is something that signals and bestows authority. But in the Western legal sense, authorship is also a form of property ownership. And I'm sure this is a topic in the book fair. So an author is not only the creator of the expression in a work, the author owns its copyright in the legal sense. Authors sometimes sign copyright over to a publisher, but otherwise, authors control the reproduction, display, and distribution of a work. And through copyright, a creative work becomes a commodity. And through that commodity, an author, and even more often a publisher, can profit. So when Rebecca and I started thinking about this book, Crip Authorship, and the media, the sort of the composition and media and publishing norms through which disabled people rethink authorship, at first we were just using the word author in an everyday way, just to refer to composition across many fields and formats. But very quickly in our collaborative process with, 36 authors, we had to confront the Western legal definition of authorship. We immediately learned that copyright is ableist. And I'll give you a few examples of how. Um, in a legal sense, we realized Crip authorship can seem like an impossibility or a contradiction in terms. Who's allowed to be an author in the legal sense? Who's allowed to own intellectual property? Who has the right to copyright? So, for one example, people with mental and cognitive disabilities who are subject to guardianship. Um, I don't know, think this is a phenomenon around the world. It's certainly a phenomenon in the United States, brought to global attention by pop star Britney Spears, who was subjected to guardianship for many years. Those people are stripped, anyone in that legal condition is stripped of legal personhood, which often includes property rights, including the right to publish under one's own name. So to publish Crip authorship, all of our writers were required to sign contracts with NYU, New York University Press, granting New York University copyright, among other things. But some of our authors did not have the legal right to do this or to choose without guardian consent whether to be named as the author of their own words. Related to the theme of translation, the book fair theme, as a second example, we learned that for a work to be copyrighted, so for legal authorship to be granted, it must be, and this is from the US Copyright Office, fixed in a tangible medium of expression. It has to take a form that can be copied, a page, an audio tape, or a digital format. But not all Crip composition fits within that commodity version of authorship. So, for instance, one of our chapters is originally in the language protactile. This is a deafblind tactile and gestural language. When does protactile become copyrightable? What is a protactile author? In our book, our author, deafblind poet John Leigh Clark, describes the impossibility of translating protactile into image or sound or text-based media for copyright. When protactile is filmed or when it's transcribed, which are copyrightable formats, most of the tactile language is lost. And those are only two examples of how copyright is ableist. Copyright and the legal definition of authorship also end up barring or hindering disabled readers. When copyright holders control publication, they also often control formats, alteration of those formats, and distribution in terms of cost and access under this for-profit model of copyright. And formats like Braille or large print for seemingly small markets end up not being produced very often. So for this reason, it was important for us that Crip authorship be published simultaneously in print and in an online open access format, flexible for use with screen readers, and that doesn't exist behind an academic paywall. So you can access this book totally for free on the NYU Press website. We had to raise money to make that happen, which is quite frustrating, but it is available open access. So just to conclude, I want to say something about the word crip, which is sometimes considered an untranslatable word. So I've told you a bit about the word authorship in our title. Unlike the word authorship or the word disability, this word crip in English doesn't have a legal definition. It's not a term under which people make legal or rights-based claims. It's historically a pejorative term in English, again, not always easy to translate. It now signals, it's been appropriated and now signals community affiliation, political resistance, transforming material conditions, among other things. It gestures toward a large collective. It doesn't necessarily index a particular disability experience. The individual chapters in Crip authorship often do focus on particulars, and our authors discuss blind, deaf, autistic, contingent, chronically ill, MAD, and many other processes of composing, making, communicating, and publishing. The authors in the book consider lived experiences, including caste, gender and gender identity, violence, and injury that have ambivalent relationships to disability. And authors in the book reckon with translation, critique English language imperialism, and consider Indigenous, Black feminist, and other genealogies for the field of disability studies and its concepts beyond the Western legal history. So we have three contributors with us today, each writing on different aspects of Crip authorship and disability as method, and we'll take turns introducing them. First is Remy Yergo. M. Remy Yergo, they, them, theirs, is a Canada Research Chair in Critical Disability Studies and Communication and Associate Professor of Communication and Media Studies at Carleton University. They are the author of Authoring Autism on Rhetoric and Neurological Queerness, a book that really inspired this edited collection. They're also one of many co-authors of Techno-Skepticism, Between Possibility and Refusal, which just came out this year from Stanford. They direct the Digital Accessible Futures Lab as part of the DISCO network, Digital Inquiry, Speculation, Collaboration, and Optimism.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be participating in this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to hearing and learning more from my co-panelists. Um, the the section of my essay that I'm going to be reading from is titled "Composing Perseveration slash Perseverative Composing." I also just want to give a quick visual description of my little thumbnail. So I am a white non-binary person. I'm wearing glasses and a light blue headset, and my tiny dog, who is laying beside me on my desk, might make an occasional appearance on the screen. So I'll go ahead and start. M&Ms on the table, organized by color. A line of toys arranged according to size. A thought that needs to burst, that needs to expel, to wrench itself free, to crunch against your esophagus and careen its way into the sonic world. An obsession with the electric light orchestra, one that dominates all interpersonal contact and structures daily life. Have you seen them on tour yet? They have a light show. A deep-seated need to flap your fingers, an embodied priority that ranks higher in the body queue than sneezing and urination. A life-shattering fear that you improperly disposed of a battery in 2017, and perhaps the battery exploded and started a fire, or injured a jogger, or killed a sanitation worker, or irreparably poisoned an entire ecosystem. Desire, distress, requirement, repetition, release, repetition. In many ways, this chapter offers more of a provocation about neurodivergent composition than it does a tidy argument. For what these repeated acts tick us toward is perseveration, or what I might otherwise describe as a body-mind's compulsion to ruminate and rehearse. Perseveration is sticky. Its Latin origin translates as strictly abided by. Autistic author Judy Endow describes perseveration as, quote, repeating things over and over, end quote. Perseveration is typified by capital R redundance, by excess, by insistence, by sameness, by stuckness. According to psychologist Timothy Pychyl, perseveration is an action that persists, quote, beyond a desired point, end quote. Redundance, excess, insistence, beyond a desired point. Arguably, being alive and disabled is already persistence beyond a desired point. Typically, perseveration is represented as a negative, as a symptom that many disabled people involuntarily experience. Even outside the domain of disability, perseveration harbors negativistic flair. Initially emerging in relation to the words perseverance and persistence, which arguably may hold more positive or value neutral connotations, perseveration's contemporary definitions rely on behaviorist strands of psychology. Indeed, its emergence as a psychiatric term in the early 20th century is tightly interwoven with clinical work on sensoria, cognition, and bodily movements. In the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, perseveration is described in the language of repetitive and ritualized behaviors and interests. In the parlance of mental disability more broadly, perseveration is also bound up in descriptions of obsessions, compulsions, tics, self-stimulatory behavior, and stereotypies. Stereotypy in particular has historically not only referenced the stereotyped movements of neurodivergent people, so for example, embodied motions such as body rocking, finger flicking, head banging, or verbal scripting. But it's also represented the stereotyped movements of gender non-conforming people. So, for example, the movement of hands onto hips, flexed elbows, limp wrists. Where perseveration is concerned, the impulse to pathologize is strong, signifying embodied configurations that traverse disability, gender, and perception. So, in this essay, I contend that perseveration is not merely the pathology that psychiatry suggests. In saying that perseveration is not merely pathology, I'm not saying that it's never experienced as bad or terrible, because it often does just feel plain bad and terrible, especially when you can't stop mentally tallying how many times you've checked your stove and fear you might have burnt down your entire neighborhood. Rather, I propose that perseveration may at times provide us a performative framework, an unruly framework for writing and multimodally composing, for creating scenes and disrupting, for cripping and defying and spiraling. Importantly, I approach this framework from a disability rhetoric perspective. In summoning rhetoric, I mean to suggest that relationships and power dynamics are central to thinking about how body minds write and express. Disability rhetoric as a field pays particular attention to how any composition is embedded in normative, often violent understandings of how we communicate, interact, and dwell. So too does disability rhetoric provide us methods for rethinking pathologized forms, such as compulsions, tics, and obsessions, as a means of communicating, expressing, or signifying. As Christina Cedillo notes, disability rhetoric's attention to power and communicative acts troubles binaristic notions of writer and reader, of designer and user, of doctor and doctored. Drawing on critical race studies and critical disability studies, Cedillo highlights the ways in which racialized and neurodivergent readers, quote, distinctive embodied identities are rhetorical arrangements of and in the flesh, for they literally, corporeally, and spatially disrupt normative order. In other words, any socially just approach to communicating demands an understanding of writing that compasses us toward non-normative embodiment. Cedillo further encourages readers to make room for bodily diversity in composition by highlighting race and disability as critical means of embodied invention that gainfully unsettle habituated expectations. Building on Cedillo's work on race, disability, and writing, I'm hoping that we might think about perseveration as an awkward arrangement of the flesh, a compulsive mode of persisting within and against normative space. So I keep returning then to persistence beyond a desired point. I'm thinking about the ways in which the lives of neurodivergent people are bound up in endless acts of repetition. Repetition that's stigmatized, denigrated, and sometimes born of trauma, and exponentially so for those whose perseverations are entwined in experiences of racism, classism, and anti-queer bias. Persistence beyond a desired point. Whose point is desired here? Far from viewing perseveration as an act of composing, clinical literature represents those who perseverate as trapped between thought and action, as dysphoric tickers and the sadly obsessed. And to be fair, many of us are sadly obsessed, but that doesn't mean our sad obsessions aren't modes of creation. Routinely checking behind one's car for dead bodies might be distressing, but it's also an action, a series of motions that modulate spatial conditions. So, in many ways, disability rhetoric is uniquely primed to unsettle how we think about perseverating, given what we know about nonlinearity, writing, processing, knowing, and repetition. And if rhetoric isn't about repetition, then what the hell is it about? So, my provocation, as it were, is to suggest that perseveration exceeds symptomatology. What would it mean to consider perseveration as a way of writing oneself hypervigilantly? To think about perseveration as a mode of invention or access creation? Indebted to J. Dolmage's work on retrofitting, I suggest that perseveration might be more capaciously understood as actions disabled people engage in to maintain relations within, toward, around, or in defiance of a given space. These actions might be experienced as pleasurable, painful, embarrassing, entertaining, transgressive, involuntary, purposeful, or a number of any other affective modes, because persistence and space and relating are complicated things. In other words, I want to ask, absent broad systemic change, how do neurodivergent people, often of necessity, create access in inaccessible terrain? How do neurodivergent people body as verb? Where and when are we getting stuck or unstuck in communicative exchange? So, for our purposes, I'm hoping we can think through and trouble perseveration in a couple of different ways. First, my hope is that it might show us where our own assumptions, as well as our methods and our institutions, tend to value the neurologically normative in their very design. And second, as we together perseverate on perseveration, my hope is that we might consider moments in which there might be value in reclaiming retrofitting as a practice. So, what would it mean, for example, to think about Crip composing practices, such as trigger warnings, interaction badges, or collective hand flapping under the banner of the retrofit? Does perseveration lend retrofitting more potential, more possibilities beyond afterthoughts, fantastic revision, and exclusion? So thank you all. I'm going to pause here because of time, but I look forward to talking and thinking more with you.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to have our other presenter today, Kelsey, will be joining. And they were writing about plain language. So Kelsey is here writing today, bringing her writing about plain language.
We're just pausing for one moment for the interpreter to get settled.
So she's going to be speaking about the plain language for writer McSweeney's The Audio Issue, and also talking about Wong's Year of the Tiger and Disability Intimacy.
She is a postdoctoral researcher at the Center of Performance Technology and Equity at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, where her research focuses on performances created for people with sensory sensitivity. Take it away, Kelsey.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's such a pleasure. So, this chapter itself is written in what I was calling plain language and am now calling plainer language. And I'm going to jump around a little bit in the chapter, but I think it'll all make sense. Why is plain language important? Disability advocacy spaces can be unfriendly to people who don't know all the right words. Sarah Luderman wrote this at the start of the plain language translation of Disability Visibility by Alice Wong. When I read this, I thought about all my disabled friends who aren't interested in the ideas coming from disability culture and disability activism. These friends had told me that when they read these ideas or heard people talk about them, they feel like these ideas aren't for them. My friends can't hold complicated ideas in their mind long enough to understand them because of brain fog or cognitive impairment. Big words reminded them of university. There was a lot of barriers to my friends doing well at university. This made them feel bad about themselves. Now, when they read ideas that are new and complicated, sometimes they feel like they're back in university. They feel like they can't have conversations with people using long sentences and words they don't know. When Luderman wrote, disability advocacy spaces can be unfriendly to people who don't know all the right words, I felt the truth of that. I also knew that I had made disability culture and activism spaces unfriendly because I love big, complicated ideas and I write in ways that aren't clear. I care about accessibility. Accessibility is when someone can take part in an experience in a way that feels meaningful to them. Accessibility is one of the ways disabled people get to have the experiences they want to have. I want to make disability culture and activism spaces and ideas more accessible. Plain language is a tool that can make disability culture and activism more accessible to people who feel like complicated language and ideas aren't for them. Plain language is a way of writing and designing text. Plainlanguage.gov says plain language, also called plain writing or plain English, is communication your audience can understand the first time they read or hear it. This means that people reading plain language don't have to work to understand the text. Usually people creating plain language documents want to make knowledge available to people who are not experts, often so they can make better decisions. Usually these decisions are about practical things like what to buy, if someone should sign a contract, how to fill out a form for the government, what kind of medical treatment to try first, or even who to vote for. I'm going to tell you some of the things I think about with plain language. Because plain language is used in so many different places, there's a lot of different ways to do plain language. But no matter how we do plain language, we want clear writing that people understand quickly. This way of writing is very different from the way that some critical disability studies researchers have thought about writing and communication. Critical disability studies researchers are often interested in how disability can change how the world thinks we should speak or write. Critical disability studies researchers like McGruer, St. Pierre, Yergo, and Price often write about how non-disabled people assume that everyone should write or speak clearly, quickly, in an order that makes sense to a lot of people. So there is only one meaning, and efficiently, meaning so other people don't have to work to understand. The world assumes people should write or speak in these ways because of capitalism. Capitalism teaches us to value speed and efficiency. For example, think of a factory. The factory owner wants to increase the speed of production and to eliminate any pauses to making the product. This is because if the factory can produce more of the product in a shorter time, then the factory can make more money. Capitalism also teaches us that time needs to be linear, and there should be a direct movement from the past to present to future. This way of thinking about time is everywhere in Western culture. We want to be as efficient and direct as possible, but often disabled people are not efficient or direct. St. Pierre, Yergo, and Price all explain how disabled people's communication can be different from the ways people are generally expected to communicate. The differences between how disabled people communicate and how they're supposed to communicate can help us imagine how the world could be different. In particular, they help us imagine a world that's not about efficiency and directness. A world without efficiency and directness could be a better world for disabled people. St. Pierre is a researcher who writes about stuttering and fluency. For St. Pierre, fluency is a word related to the world's ideas about what is normal. Fluency is about time. Fluency is the smooth movement from the past to the present to the future at a pace most people feel okay with. People who are fluent don't look like they're working hard when they speak. Fluency creates a singular meaning. Disabled people may have a hard time creating fluency. Sometimes disabled people speak at a speed that's not expected by other people. For example, someone who stutters speaks at an uneven pace, or someone who types to speak will create long pauses in the conversation. Sometimes disabled people have to work really hard to make other people understand them. For St. Pierre, disfluency is a word for the way people who speak with a lot of effort or at an unexpected speed, or whose words can mean a lot of different things, force us to consider the ways of speaking, communicating, other than our usual fluent ways. It's important to note here that St. Pierre is talking about speech, but I think what St. Pierre says is very often true of writing. Yergo is a researcher who has written about autistic rhetoric. Autistic rhetoric includes the ways people write and talk about autistic people and how autistic people actually communicate. Yergo writes about echolalia. Echolalia is the repetition of words and phrases. Yergo says that the repetition of words and phrases is often not about the words and phrases themselves. The words and phrases are tools to communicate a wide range of feelings and meanings. Echolalia uses words and phrases to mean many different things. But the world doesn't value ways of speaking or writing that create multiple meanings. If the way you communicate has multiple meanings or is confusing, then people will say you don't make sense. Price also writes about teaching writing to university students. Price points out that one of the ways the world recognizes people as people is to ask if they make sense. Making sense can mean communicating only one meaning. It can mean communicating with only the right amount of emotion. If writing students don't make sense, then writing students might decide the student is disabled. But deciding a student is disabled doesn't mean that the teacher will make the classroom more accessible or try to help the student. Instead, the teacher might create more barriers. This is because if the people don't make sense, the world is unkind to them. All these researchers talk about how disabled people can't communicate the way the world expects them to. If people can't communicate the way the world expects them to, they're discriminated against. This could mean that there's more barriers to them finishing university, getting a job, and connecting with other people. So critical disabilities researchers want to make it okay for disabled people to communicate however they communicate. They want to make it more than okay. They want all the ways that disabled people communicate to be respected. In many ways, plain language is the opposite to the kinds of communication that these critical disability studies researchers are talking about. Short sentences, lists, using the most common words possible, all make reading quick and easy. Using the most common words is also contrary to the ways disability communities have consistently reclaimed and reshaped language. In other chapters or on this panel, you might have heard words like crip or mad or neurodivergent. The people who wrote those chapters use those words because they mean very specific things, but they also use them because they are unfamiliar. They're meant to stop the reader. These words slow the reader and make them consider ways of understanding disability and the world that the reader has not previously considered. These words change the pace you read at, the same way St. Pierre says stuttering changes the pace you listen at. Plain language is all about being quick, direct, and asking the reader to do as little work as possible. Disability could change the world because it forces us to question our focus on speed and efficiency. And also, I keep thinking about all the ways I've seen disability culture and disability activism be unfriendly to many disabled people because of the ways we ask disabled people to read. If there is one thing I've learned from disability culture, it is that there is never one right way of being, doing, or communicating. Usually the best thing to make things accessible is to have a lot of different ways of communicating. I think plain language documents should exist alongside complex text, much the same way we might make sound recording of writing, caption videos, or have important information translated into our local sign language. Critical disability scholars need to think about how we write and who we write for. Is complex language the only way we can imagine new ways of thinking and being? Who do we exclude from new thinking about disability when we use big words and complicated sentences? I can be excited about the ways disabled people communicate that make me work to understand. And I can understand that for other people, that can be a barrier. Beyond this, I want disabled people to claim and imagine plain language for ourselves. Non-disabled people don't agree on how to do plain language. So maybe disabled people can develop a version of plain language that is for disability communities. When I was describing the history of plain language, I mentioned that some researchers want plain language to take a human-centered design approach, where people who will use the documents are involved in the creation of the documents. Involving disabled people who need plain language in making plain language documents could lead to new ways of doing plain language. Developing new access tools and better ways of creating access is one of the things disabled people do best. I think Sarah Luderman is right that everyone should have access to what disabled people think about disability. Plain language shouldn't just be for making decisions about what to buy, what medical treatment you should have, or who to vote for. Those are important, but so are the ideas coming from disability culture. Everyone should be able to read writing that is about how incredible disabled people are. Everyone should be able to see or listen to art about the ways disabled people care for each other. Writing that celebrates and loves disabled people can make people much happier. It can be life-saving. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelsey. It was great to have you paired with Remy, which doesn't happen in the book itself. So this is like a wonderful combination because so many new resonances are coming out. This is Mara again, and I'm going to introduce our final presenter today, Jaypreet Verdi, who's going to be speaking about her chapter in Crip Authorship on public scholarship as disability justice. Until very recently, Jaypreet was Associate Professor of History at the University of Delaware. She is currently, as in right now, in her car driving across Canada to move to the University of Victoria for a new position as a professor, which will start this summer. So we're very lucky to have Jaypreet joining us from her move. Her work centers on disability in the history of science, technology, and medicine, and she's especially interested in how disabled people have designed, modified, or adapted technologies as a radical resistance against medical perceptions. She describes herself as a scholar activist and uses her research as a tool for influencing public discourse and policy. Her books include Hearing Happiness, Deafness Cures in History from 2020, Chicago Press, and from this year, Echoes of Care, Deafness in Modern Britain from McGill Queen's University Press. Thank you for joining us from your massive road trip, Jay. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Mara. Just to note, I am not currently driving. I have pulled over, so please don't worry. I'm a South Asian woman with medium length dark curly hair, wearing glasses, and I am joining the Zoom from my car somewhere in rural Manitoba. So I'm going to be reading an excerpt of my chapter that thinks about how we work as historians to introduce public scholarship as forms of disability justice. So public scholarship is quite simply scholarship for the public. It can show up in different forms of engagement, like blogs, social media posts, vlogs, TikTok videos, websites, podcasts, museums, documentary, op-eds, lectures, essays, activism, exhibits, television, and so on. But it is actually concentrated on the notion of making knowledge accessible to the public. And public scholarship aims to bridge academic expertise with public consciousness and often circulates in spaces that are easily understood and available to address publicly identifiable needs. So public scholarship has always existed, but it has become a central aspect of academic discourse over the past 25 years as researchers have worked to build relationships with the communities through social justice. It's connected and related to really crucial words like diverse democracy, equity, and social justice. But the big question I have is, if public scholarship is centrally about making knowledge accessible, then what does it mean for it to act as disability justice? So, if justice is the first virtue of social institutions, as philosopher John Rawls declared, then how do we continuously ensure that disabled people, their lives, and their history are represented in spaces that are made accessible to them? How can academics researching and writing about disability history engage with disabled communities in a way that is democratic? So public history is a subset of public scholarship. It affords an opportunity because as citizens and scholars, historians possess this responsibility for disseminating knowledge through clarifying past narratives and concepts and preserving primary sources and ideas about what constitutes as fact. Digital spaces have especially provided tools for reaching a wider range of audiences, including those like disabled people who often tend to be excluded from academic institutions or restricted from obtaining historical resources on account of inaccessibility. Moreover, the historical marginalization and silence, if not absence, of disabled people in the archive has prompted scholars to rethink what the archive, quote unquote, is and how historical materials are collected and categorized. So the idea of cripping the archive not only prompts a critical reexamination of how ableness informs the politics of the archive, but it also gives us multiple perspectives for evaluating the temporal, spatial, and material constructions of disability. So public scholarship and public history allows us to reimagine our audience and assumptions about what counts as, quote, an academic scholarship. So years ago, when I was a graduate student, I launched a blog to share aspects of my research on 19th century cultural histories of deafness in medicine. And in these early ages of social media, I was often cross-posting my articles on Facebook and Twitter, and then later on Instagram. But I wasn't just posting what I was writing about. I was also sharing interesting tidbits I learned while browsing on digital collections or searching for historical images related to my own project. But when I looked at the engagement and blog statistics, I learned that most of the followers of my content were not academics, as I previously believed, but curious general readers, some of whom were deaf and eager to learn about this shared medical and cultural past. And being trained as a historian and as a graduate student, this experience forced me to confront my own assumptions about how academic scholarship can actually exclude the very people whose histories are being examined and written about. So this process of sharing images on social media with brief context explaining their relevance became a form of engagement. It became a way for me to educate a public on historical aspects of deafness, fascination, medical advancements, and general cultural frameworks about health and healing. But as with all forms of creation, this required an ethical process. Because while some historical images can be fun and quirky or even generally informative, others require a little bit more nuance and sensitive oversight in order to avoid being sensationalized or stripped away from context. And this becomes really important when we think about the implications of looking at pictures of people suffering and disabled and diseased bodies. When we look at these images, do we learn anything more? Is it appropriate to post on social media and share it? Why do we do this? Is it meant to shock or discomfort the viewer? And how do we, as historians, connect objectivity and historical value with this tendency for sentimentality and spectacle, which can become really problematic when we share images of disabled people? Staring, as Rosemary Garland Thompson explained, is a vivid form of human communication, one that is, quote, an embodied and relational visual exchange that carries complex cultural and historical meanings, end quote. Nowhere is this embodiment so vivid as in discussions of disabled, disfigured, or deformed bodies. The histories of people whose perceived abnormality invited the medical ableist gaze. But in this process of creating, viewing, categorizing, and exhibiting disabled bodies, even if we offer academics new ways of thinking and theorizing about how disability fits with medical history, this process tends to strip disabled people of control over their own narratives. We remove their agency, we reduce their personhood to mere objects of curiosity, and we erase their lived experiences. So what happens when we return autonomy back to disabled people and center their stories? This is what the American disabled activist Alice Wong set out to do with her project, Disability Visibility, which was launched in 2014 in partnership with StoryCorps. This was an online community dedicated to creating, sharing, and amplifying disability media and culture. The Disability Visibility Project is written by disabled people based on the notion that disabled narratives matter and they belong to us. By championing by championing disability culture, history, art, media, and politics, Wong's project organizes and supports work by disabled people by having them write blog posts, conduct oral history interviews, as well as promote their work through social media and using promotional hashtags. Wong's achievements with the Disability Visibility Project demonstrates how narratives become crucial in the formation of identity creation and transformation, especially for justice-based activism and politics. Using these kinds of life story narratives becomes incredibly powerful for conveying how individual experiences of disability can construct meaningful understanding for policies, such as how American disabled activists use their stories and bodies to show the public how social and environmental barriers literally prevented their full inclusion into society. And this eventually led to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. Collectively, these narratives about disability add to the richness of our cultural heritage. But the struggle were not erased the moment that the ADA was signed into law. Instead, the quote, ADA generation, which is a term coined by disability activist Rebecca Sanchez, created a first generation of disabled advocates who grew up at the intersection of disability rights legislation, expecting their rights to be guaranteed, but instead finding resentment and further ableism. For these people, disability is identity and pride. And for disabled people of color like Wong or myself, these narratives position us in cultural discourses in which we have long been left in the sidelines. So by bringing narrative of disability experience into the forefront of the stories we write, we lay the groundwork for justice. Narratives use the power of the word enriched with emotion, written, spoken, articulated, to shape the necessary change for justice by cultivating this resistance to oppression. And for disability, narrative justice can serve as a form of affirmation. It ensures that disability narratives and disabled people are not erased in stories about them. And these narratives can also present lived experiences as joy and individual experiences rather than the usual trail of trauma and overcoming. Moreover, it is imperative that these stories are made accessible to disabled people as well. These are their, as well as our histories and experiences, and providing access to both serves to continue these narratives as well as inform them. In other words, we need to really adhere to the disability community's long-lasting slogan, nothing about us without us. And I strongly believe that narrative justice through essay writing can also become all the more crucial for addressing misinformation or contextualizing social issues that could benefit from a disability perspective. So it is at this juncture that a bridge is needed between academic scholarship and public history. Using plain language, as Kelsey explained, we can manage to make theoretical and historical writing accessible for general readers. And in so doing, we can dismantle barriers that prevent disabled people from accessing knowledge about their social, cultural, and political histories. And public history demonstrates that the past matters as more than just historical memory. It becomes a tool for explaining how and why our societies are the way they are, and for better understanding the structural inequities that distort the experiences of the colonized and oppressed. And I especially feel as a historian of medicine and a historian of disability that sharing these issues through history and commenting on public concern is important for advocating this notion that disability is central to our understanding about our society. So I'm going to stop here now, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jay. Heroic presentation on the side of the highway. I think all of us will pop back on screen now. And perhaps Alina or someone in person will moderate some questions. We can't see the room, so I'll just let you know.
Hello? Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Oh, we can
And
hear
you
you
also
and
see me.
you're on
Yes.
screen with us.
Thank you so much, Mara and Rebecca. I will just check if there's any questions here in the space. I already see one hand that is raised, and I'll pass the mic, and then you can think of more questions, and we can also check the chat. Oh, Payam is passing on the mic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so, so much. My name is Amma Josephine Budge. I am a tall, mixed race, black woman in a yellow top with an afro and a baby currently breastfeeding whilst listening. That was really incredible and deeply moving. Thank you. I'm wondering if you can help me to keep thinking about this idea of plain language and audience as a Black queer writer and also academic and lecturer based in the UK, who writes about Blackness, which means that I'm writing about Blackness and queerness in a predominantly white context and for a predominantly white readership, both in the world of literature and the academy. I try and find this balance between what I have thought of as, I guess, hospitality, but I really love, I think plain language is even more helpful, and also somehow arming or armoring my thinking against being extracted, being hashtagged, being weaponized by white readers and used against Black communities. And but I also feel that I'm part of creating barriers to people who I want to access my thinking and even my undergraduate students. So I would just love to hear some thoughts on audience and navigating. I mean, there's no clear answer, but navigating, finding who you want to reach and accessibility, and also being aware of the ways in which our work is so often taken up and used against us and our communities when we make it easily readable and plain, and sometimes making it not easily readable and demanding the reader works for it is a way of saying you have to work to get access to this if it's not your experience. But yeah, there's a double-edged sword. So I would just love any thoughts and deep, deep gratitude to all of you.
Maybe I'll say a couple of words about the inner contradictions of the book and then pass it to maybe Kelsey, since you are in the UK right now, Canadian, but in the UK. Well, let me just say it directly. There's a lot of internal contradiction in our book that we don't try to resolve at all. Rebecca and I both really love the edited volume format. In academic worlds, edited volumes are often criticized for being messy or inconsistent or baggy, all sorts of words like that. But that's exactly what we wanted from the book. And there are a lot of edited volumes in disability studies and disability culture and they're very multivocal. And this is just to say that many of the authors, as Kelsey did in her talk today, discuss the the need and at the same time the pitfalls of plain language. Many of our authors don't write in plain language. In fact, we have authors like Mel Chen writing against plain language in Crip Authorship and saying that plain language is impossible for some people to write. But I love the question you raise about dangers of plain language. Also, I want to thank you for describing yourself as a sighted person. In this format, I can't see you. I don't see the audience, so it was nice to just to get a sense of you and the space. So I will say that there are a lot of reasons for obfuscation. There are a lot of Black disabled artists, like I'm thinking of Carolyn Lazard, who have explicitly theorized and also in their arts practice worked on things like fugitivity and obfuscation, not just minor communication to a particular group, but literally obfuscation as modes of self-protection. And I think your question about when plain language makes one too available to too many audiences is incredibly important. We have other parts of the book and that look at problems of groups that only want access for certain people. And in my own work, I've worked with archives that are for blind, queer, separatist communities only. And in a digital moment, how do you actually make something not universal? So I'll stop there and turn things to Kelsey, but I just wanted to say this is absolutely something that runs through the book. There are chapters in the book that are specifically about Black disabled communities. Again, there's lots of internal diversity there. Lamar Jarrell Bruce writes about Mad Black Rants. There's much more than that too in the book. But yeah, Kelsey, I don't know if you have more to, I know you have lots more to say about plain language.
Kelsey speaking. I think maybe I'll also, my brain froze and I did not describe myself. So maybe I'll briefly do that because I think positionality is important here. So I'm a white woman with pulled back, dark brown hair and clear glasses, and I'm sat in my flat in Leeds with a very healthy, shockingly plant right over my shoulder. So I want to say yes. And I think fugitivity and obfuscation are incredibly important tactics, and I don't want to lose them. And I think they should be deployed. I think I hold a few contradictions here. And what I'm going to say is not entirely coherent. So I do work on planar language that exists on the internet, like Alice Wong's biography. And I also do planar language in the context of relationships. So relationships with artists in the UK who would be called learning disabled or artists with learning disabilities. And I think for me, when I'm writing these things on the internet, I'm thinking about my relationships with those people. So I want all of the incredible work of disability culture to be available to people who are very, very often denied it, partly because of the way we write, and partly because often their worlds are gate-kept by non-disabled people who don't view disability culture as important. And I can't get rid of that barrier, but I can tackle the barrier of how we speak. So I wonder if maybe the way of both protecting yourself and also opening up your work to the people who need it most, so your community, is to think about maybe planar language exists in relationship. Maybe it doesn't just exist on the internet if that's something dangerous. But how do you practice it in conversation or in emails? I'll stop my wonderings there because it's not really an answer. It's just living with the contradiction.
Thank you so much for this question and for these reflections. Is there any other question in the space here? I don't see one right now. Was there any question in the chat? I cannot see that. No. I don't know, Rebecca and Mara, if you want to ask something else to the panelists, or if there are questions amongst Kelsey, Remy, and Jaypreet that you want to reflect on between yourselves.
We have one question in the chat right now, which is, how can I imagine the process of finding authors for your book? Well, if I'm understanding this correctly, if I was thinking of this in the future sense, I would say, how could one, if you want to imagine finding authors, I think there should be more versions of this book edited by other people, and certainly in different national contexts. The book is international, but it's still limited. It's in English and sometimes translated, but I think there are many, many other possible imagined authors and real authors who weren't included. And I would release my copyright to anyone who, and I'm sure Rebecca I don't know if you agree, but like release our copyright to anyone who wants to do other versions of this, possibly, with different titles. How we put the book together, Rebecca, do you want to, maybe this was as Rebecca said, in the beginning year of COVID. And so my memory is maybe not even as that great about, but do you want to say anything about how we began the book and found authors?
Yes, I think we started initially, like you mentioned, actually, in your introduction and in your introductory comments, Mara. So some of the work that we did there was really focused on a disability space. And some things just don't have necessarily one meaning. So we talked about, again, like we had mentioned, publishing as well. So the idea of people who know the context and people who don't yet know, but might be just getting interested, people who are already published versus people who are not. So also, we went out and we asked so very many people out there to be a part of this. And again, it was during early COVID. So that kind of work really impacted the ask that we were asking people. It was a big ask. And so we were so very grateful to everyone really who was willing to share and take their time and put their intellectual energy into the project.
And Rebecca's frozen for us, and we're not.
Rebecca's frozen. I'll jump in and say a few last things while we wait for Rebecca to unfreeze. We invited about 50 people, maybe 55. That would have been an incredibly long book, and I think our publisher would have been even more angry than the 400 and something page book. But a lot of people could not participate because of being ill, having so many demands and worries because of COVID. So we did, Rebecca and I have both run, we're old friends. We both run disability studies minors. We did not do an open call for papers, partly because we wanted the book to come out quickly and that would have taken longer. And we invited people who we knew used different methods. It's a methods book. So it's not a book about a particular topic, which might be better for an open call. We invited people who we knew had written about method before, whether it was ASL publishing or madness as method, perseveration as method. So we invited people we knew had worked on method. And then we also asked people with big audiences like Alice Wong to help us brainstorm authors who weren't academics who worked on methods. So the book is not only academics. And we called on activists and people with gigantic social networks and people who also had done a lot of editing to give us names. And we kind of overreached in our invitations, and the people who were available did it. And then we had meetings with the authors to talk about the book as we went along. And people dropped out along the way because, again, it was 2020. People became sick and had lots of responsibilities. So there's limitations in terms of how international we could be, even though that was a goal for us. And yeah, I would love to see, we need more methods books. There are some others coming out soon. I want to say there's a disability history methods book coming out. Jay, I'm forgetting who the editors are, but I know it's on like Cripping the Archive. That will be out soon. So we also need like really specific disability methods books for particular fields. We're like an omnibus, and we're looking more at the stream of authorship, including media, publishing, and research, but we actually need like much more specific disability methods books. That's not what we were doing. I know this is getting a little long-winded, and it's a really good question. We were messy and messy and broad in our invitations. Rebecca, I know you froze. I don't know if you want to add anything else.
No, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other question here in the space or in the chat? Yes, one more question over there.
Hello, I'll try to do this in English. My name is Leah. I'm a white woman with very short brown hair and wearing a brown shirt. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about working in publishing. I'm a publisher at a very, very small voluntary publishers collective, and I know it's our responsibility to reflect our ways of work and break down barriers. But if you could tell us a little bit more about how you could imagine to, how can publishers be more inclusive, more available for working with people with disabilities? Thank you.
We probably all have an answer for this. I see that Jay dropped off. Jay Preet has a lot to say on this in terms of social media and non-print publishing, non-commodity publishing. So I think, and Rebecca has dropped off. We didn't actually think we would have a publishing section at first. When we used the word authorship, we thought we were going to cover research, composition in different modes, genres of disabled writing, and then maybe media formats. And a lot of our authors spontaneously wanted to write about publishing because they were so frustrated by the barriers of publishing as an industry. So they didn't want to just write about platforms and tech. It was also bureaucracy and copyright and like barriers. And so there's amazing Crip publishing happening all over the world by artists. I want to mention like Kaya Wairea working in London, who does a lot of zine publishing. This is not commodity Crip publishing. This is small, community-based, often free. Some of it you can order online. Finnegan Shannon, based in the US, is an artist doing amazing Crip publishing, making, books about alt text and selfies. Some are free, some you can order with puffy stickers on them. There's amazing anti-publishing publishing happening in the Crip world, all over the world. Our section on publishing tends to be more about critique of the inaccessibility, whether that's economic or sensory or academic of mainstream publishing. And we have chapters on how to create a disability series within a mainstream press. We have chapters about ASL publishing and what would it look like for journals that would include not only an English language text translation, but ASL video. We have the chapter that's basically just a critique by John Lee Clark on protactile publishing and much more than that. So this is to say there's two ways to think about publishing. One is about access, but the other is about Crip modes of publishing, many of which simply aren't going to look like publishing in any form of corporate sense or legal sense or copyright sense as we know it. Kelsey and Remy, since Rebecca and Jay are both having some connectivity problems, do you have examples of publishing?
This is Remy speaking. Mara, this goes in a little bit of a different direction from what you were noting about the non-commodity aspect. Maybe where I can direct focus a little bit is to the genre conventions or expectations aspect. I'm autistic, and autistic culture is the disability space that I largely came up through and how I came to understand myself as disabled. And I think something that happens time and again in those spaces are folks who want to write specifically about autism, autistic culture, disability, but face a whole host of hurdles in getting their work recognized because they're not engaging in the conventions that a publisher might expect, including, things we might conventionally understand as life writing or memoir, but also a desire to have their work be seen as a form of research and to be part of research conversations. So, to give some examples, autistic folks often talk about repetition or what a non-autistic person might consider to be information overload or TMI, an autistic person, it's a cultural form and an expectation in those spaces. And so I think that becomes incredibly important. Um, there's also, the disability rights motto, nothing about us without us. And I think especially in neurodiversity spaces, developmental and intellectual disability spaces, that becomes a really kind of crucial standing point for thinking about that inclusivity when we're talking about academic research in particular. So there have been a number of efforts around participatory action research collectives. So, if we're thinking about a publication that's on disability, but it's not, I think, Kelsey, just to borrow your language of being in relation, if it's not in relationship with disabled people, then there's a problem there because the representation automatically is at a remove from the culture that preceded it. So I will pause there, Kelsey, and turn the metaphorical baton over to you.
And I think, yes to all of that. Representation is huge. And I think I'm going to try and merge both Maura and Remy, your points by shouting out Alice Wong, who does extraordinary work around making disability culture available to disabled people for free. Alice self-funds the plain language versions of her books. So she makes sure that I'm paid, but also far more importantly, my reader testers, my sensitivity readers are also paid. And then she takes these works, and today I haven't talked about the design elements of plain language, but the design elements of plain language mean that Alice's 300-page memoir becomes over 500 pages long, and something that a publisher would, I think, have a lot of fear about putting into physical form. And Alice just puts it on her website because she really believes that disabled people deserve access to all of these ideas. And I think that too is a form of representation, that when you create access in a particular way, it says, yeah, there's an acknowledgement and recognition. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much. We didn't create a 500-page publication today, but we have 7 images on the screen, and I think we did a good job handling the technical issues at the start of this discussion. And I'm so appreciative of all the questions that came from the room and also from the digital space. I think they really linked well to the work that we're trying to do here with the book fair. And thank you again to all of our panelists and to you, Mara and Rebecca, for everything that you've brought to this space. It's always extremely exciting. I feel this moment of having this international connection and to get into contact with the discourses that you and your communities work on. And I really want to thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think there will be many links to a discussion that we will have tomorrow night about how complex progressive theory can be made accessible and what media we use for that. That will be a panel tomorrow evening, which will also be live streamed on Zoom and interpreted to English and German Sign Language if anyone wants to participate in that. And tonight I can only invite the physical audience here at Kampnagel to join the performance of Fluide Glossare at 9:30 in the hall KMH. And I think I will leave you with that, unless anyone has any last remarks, but I think, oh, someone, Emma. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Emma Josephine Budge, who just asked a question from the audience, is also an artist that we are hosting here for the second time at the Performative Book Fair with the amazing Apocalypse Reading Nook, which we put a lot of work and love for detail in. Please, Hamburg audience, come and check it out. It's in the West Foyer. And you have time there, you can read, watch videos, and find more ideas about how literature can help us through these difficult times and also bring us together. So thank you so much, Emma, for reminding me of that, and a nice evening to everybody, and bye to all of you. I hope we meet each other soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.